The question is, you have talked about your first spiritual movement being a meditation movement and that you left it. What would you say about meditation and its value on the spiritual path? Would you recommend meditation for a person new to the path? Well, it's easy enough to say something about what I think about meditation, but it's difficult to answer whether I would recommend it to someone new on the path, because it's very individual what path we each need to follow. So when I was young and foolish, now I'm not young anymore, I would have tried to come up with what I considered the ultimate spiritual technique that everybody should follow. And I've given that up. I really don't believe that there's one technique that's right for everybody. So I think it's very individual which technique you should use. And you really have to follow your intuition and trust your intuition, that there's a reason why your intuition guides you to practice a certain technique. But what I can do is I can say something about meditation based on my own experience. And if I really boil it down, I would say this. Do you consider that you live in a harmonious and peaceful environment, or do you live in an environment that is not harmonious and peaceful? And there are certainly people who could say that, at least in my local environment, it's harmonious and peaceful. But if you consider the planet you're on, I would say, who of us can say we live in a harmonious and peaceful environment when you consider that everything is energy and everything is connected and there's a collective consciousness that we are all living inside of. So, what I would say then is that if you don't consider yourself to be living in a harmonious and peaceful environment, then I would have some reservations about recommending meditation to you. Because it can easily open you up to influences from your environment that you might not be able to handle, especially if you are new to the spiritual path. So let me try and explain that in a little more detail. Now, I always talk about my first spiritual movement as the meditation movement because I don't have any agenda of exposing or denouncing that movement. But just for the sake of this discussion, most people who are familiar with meditation can easily guess that it was the TM movement, or the Transcendental Meditation movement, that I found when I was 18. And Transcendental Meditation is a form of mantra meditation, where you have a mantra in Sanskrit. So it doesn't have any meaning for you. There's not any meaning associated with a mantra. And so you sit there with your eyes closed in a comfortable position, you repeat the mantra. And the TM movement was big on keeping the mantra secret. But let's just say Om. Om could be a mantra. So you're sitting there in your mind and you're not really thinking the mantra, but you're just sort of allowing it to come up in your mind. Om, Om, Om. And the idea is that because it doesn't have any meaning or any thought associations, you don't go into a line of thought. You're not thinking about it. So you're actually, in a way, bypassing the thinking mind, the analytical mind. And this takes your attention down to a level that, as far as I can remember, it was called restful alertness, or a transcendental experience. You are transcending your normal state of mind. You're contacting this deeper level of your mind where you are aware, but you don't have particular thoughts. And that was called a transcendental experience. And there are other forms of meditation that do the same. There are other forms of mantra meditation. So the idea then was that we all have tensions in our subconscious mind. And when we go to this restful alertness, it releases the tensions. And then they can come up and it can color our minds. And we can have thoughts or feelings that come up, and the idea is that once you become aware that you are having these thoughts or feelings, you just return to the mantra. And the technique is valid enough, the technique is sufficient enough. In fact, I would say it's probably too efficient. And that's my whole point for considering, do you live in a harmonious environment or not? Because, well, there's two aspects of it that I experienced and that I saw in many other people. So the idea is that we have these tensions, they need to be released, and by going to this level of restful alertness, we release these tensions. But these are not just, in many cases, there may be some easier tensions to deal with. But in many cases, there really can be really deep tensions that come from deep traumas in this life or past lifetimes. So what many people experience, including myself, is that when we first started this technique, well, let's say it this way, there were people who didn't have any success with the meditation. And that was because they weren't able to really free themselves from the intellectual mind. They were thinking about it all the time. But those of us who were able to do that, we would experience that, yes, we would have some thoughts and feelings came up, but they weren't too bad. We just became aware of them. And once we were done with our meditation, we didn't carry it with us. And that was what I call the honeymoon period. And then after some time, we got down to some of the deeper tensions that we have. Today, I call them subconscious selves. But back then, in TM, they're probably still called tensions, or whatever they call them. So once you got to these deeper ones, this was not something that could be resolved in a 20-minute meditation. You would carry this with you when you came out of meditation. And the problem with the TM movement was it didn't really have any teachings or any process about dealing with this situation. And it actually sort of had a culture that, the meditation itself should just dissolve them. You wouldn't have to deal with them. You wouldn't have to look at it. You wouldn't have to deal with the energy that came up, the feelings that came up. You wouldn't have to look at any thoughts behind it. And this meant that there was a lot of people, myself included, who, when we started dealing with these deeper things, we just didn't know what to do with it. And we could be colored by it for some time. And there were people who left it. There were even some people who really had, it opened up. I'm not saying the TM technique created the psychological problems, but it opened up people's problems. And it overwhelmed them. They couldn't deal with it. And in the meditation movement, it was like, well, the first reaction was always, have your meditation checked, make sure you're doing it correctly. And if you were doing it correctly, well, you're not meditating enough to dissolve the tension, so meditate more. If it got really, really bad, then would be, you're meditating too much, meditate less. And it was, common in the movement that people would be striving to take these longer courses. Like first it was the teacher training courses, and then there was the governor courses that were 6 months where people would be meditating, not just 20 minutes morning and evening, but a lot more, and they were doing some more intense techniques. And so on these kind of courses, it was common that people were unstressing, as it was called, because it was too much for them. And as I said, there was really not much help to deal with it. You didn't even have the concept of the ego. And of course, there was no concept of any dark forces or anything. So this is one thing that can happen as a result of meditation. So just doing meditation alone without having any kind of understanding about psychology, I don't think is a good thing for most people. I think it can easily become overwhelming for people. Now, the other thing that happens with most forms of meditation is that it calms the mind, it quiets the mind. Whether it's mantra meditation like TM or other forms of meditation, the goal of most meditations is really to calm the thinking mind. And I'm not in any way denouncing that this has value. But again, what I'm saying is, what happens when you calm the mind? The thinking mind actually has a certain function that we aren't necessarily always aware of. And it is that it keeps out certain things from entering our minds. As I said, we are living really on planet Earth. We are living in a pretty chaotic, disharmonious environment. You just look at people. And I have talked about how we have 4 levels of the mind. There's the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the identity level. I've also talked about there's a collective consciousness. And that in the collective mind has been created these entities, these matrices, these beasts, you might call them. And they have a certain rudimentary level of consciousness where they know they can only survive if they get energy from people. So in order to survive, they are projecting whatever thought matrix they are based on into people's minds. And it can be just to stir up people's feelings. It could get them, it can be to get them to react with anger. It can be to get them into addictions. It could be to get them into certain thought patterns where they're constantly thinking but not really going anywhere. So what I'm saying is that I'm sitting here right now, and my mind is an energy field around my physical body. And my energy field is constantly being bombarded with these energy impulses, these feeling matrices, thought matrices, even a sense of identity. It's constantly being directed at me from the collective consciousness, from other people. And my conscious mind, my sense of who I am, actually has some function there. It's keeping some of these things out. Because I have decided, this is not me, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that, So what happens in meditation is you now calm the thinking mind, the conscious mind. But this means you open yourself up to certain influences that you're not normally open to. And I felt this happen with myself in meditation, and I've seen it happen to other people. I've heard other people talk about it. But when I was in the TM movement, it wasn't something that was talked about, because what happens in most spiritual movements, and this is not just TM, I've seen it in other movements. In fact, I've never seen a movement where it didn't happen. There is a process that I call unnatural selection. And it's simply that there's a culture in the movement that, we have the most advanced spiritual technique, we have the most advanced guru, we have the most advanced teaching. And nobody wants to question that. The culture doesn't want you to question it. So the people who have problems with it, who question it, or in TM, the people who have problems with meditation, they really don't see any way to stay in the movement. So they tend to leave. They select themselves out. This means that the people who are left, they are the ones who either don't have a problem or who don't want to talk about it. They're okay with not talking about it. So everybody is in this, not everybody, but a lot of people go into this pretending that everything is just wonderful. And there are no problems, that we don't need to talk about problems. We just need to meditate, and then they'll eventually go away. If we meditate long enough, it's going to go away. And this means that there's a problem that isn't recognized. And the problem is this, that to me, in my experience, meditation opens your mind to a lot of these projections that are coming from the outside. And especially if you're new to the path, it can be overwhelming. You don't know how to deal with it, especially if the movement doesn't have any teaching about it. What are you going to do if it opens you up? And what I especially felt, I didn't really feel that the TM technique itself opened me up to too much. But when I took this teacher training course in Switzerland, where I was there for 4 months, and the last month we had these Vedic teachings and some Vedic meditation practices, and I had a lot of spiritual experiences. I had a lot of non-dual experiences. But I just realized today, when I look back at it, it just opened me up, my energy field, to too many influences. And I'm not saying this was necessarily the fault of the technique itself, but it was just a consequence of the fact of what kind of planet we are on. And so for 3 or 4 years after this, I left the TM movement, and for 3 or 4 years I was really in this very difficult state. I've said I was depressed, I was in this state of no man's land, I didn't know how to deal with whatever had come up, how to process it, but I also didn't know how to deal with these projections. I didn't know they were projections, I couldn't identify them that way. So really what the only thing that helped me get out of it, I'm not saying it's the only thing that can, but what helped me get out of it was that I found my second spiritual movement. There was teachings about the Ascended Masters, and we could give these decrees where we invoked spiritual light from the Masters. And the immediate one that helped me was invoking spiritual protection from Archangel Michael, where you are invoking his light, electric blue light, around your energy field, which seals your energy field from a lot of these projections. Eventually it can seal you from all, but it can't bypass your free will. So if you're deliberately opening yourself up to something, it's not going to seal you from it. But it is going to seal you from a lot of these projections. And I experienced a very immediate effect of this, where I felt my energy field was calmer, my mind was calmer. But then over time, I started giving calls to the Elohim Astrea to cut me free from these dark forces, as I saw them at the time, and these collective selves. And that also, it took a little longer, but I really noticed also a dramatic effect. And then the third was to invoke the violet flame energy to transform the energy that was already in my energy field. And this had a much more noticeable effect for me than the meditation had ever had. Because instead of opening me up to something I couldn't deal with, it sealed my energy field, and then I had much more calm, so I could start looking at my psychology, which was a much more long-term process. So the second spiritual movement did have some teachings about psychology and the ego, and it did help me to start the process of dealing with my own psychology. And it caused a lot of growth. It wasn't as efficient as the teachings I have today about the separate selves, but it was still very good teachings, and I benefited from it. So, again, what do I think about meditation? Well, there are no doubt people who can handle it or who can benefit from it. But for somebody who's new to the path, it wouldn't be what I would recommend first. I would definitely recommend that if people are open to this idea of ascended masters, that you start using these tools to invoke assistance from the ascended masters, because they are the natural spiritual teachers for Earth. They are the ones that are the next step up in the hierarchy of spiritual beings. And so for me, when I first heard about ascended masters, it was just obvious. And I'm not trying to talk anybody into it. I'm not trying to make anybody believe it. But if it seems intuitively obvious to you, then by all means, use that. But on the other hand, again, if it seems like intuitively you should go into some form of meditation, then do it, because there's a reason why you need that experience. It's part of your path, whatever that means for you. Now, I have talked about how, in some of my breakthrough videos, how after I left my first spiritual movement, I started distrusting my intuition, because I felt my intuition had told me I could go into that movement, and now I'd come to see that it wasn't what it promised to be, so I thought I'd made a mistake. But I have later processed this and realized it wasn't a mistake for me. It was part of my path. I needed that experience for various reasons. So I would say again, trust your intuition and don't analyze with the outer mind your intuition. But for me, I will say that meditation, it's not that I haven't practiced meditation since, but other forms of meditation. But meditation has many forms. So there's a form of meditation you could call self-inquiry, where you're looking into yourself. And today I also practice a form of meditation in the sense that I sometimes just sit down, close my eyes, and I tune in to the conscious you being pure awareness. And just tune in to pure awareness, where I experience being aware without having particular thoughts or even feelings or even a sense of identity. I'm just aware. And I tune into this neutral state of awareness, where you're not judging anything with the analytical mind, the dualistic mind that has a value judgment, good or bad, should or shouldn't happen. I'm just observing, experiencing, witnessing. And so this is another form of meditation. But again, this is not something I started out with. And of course, today I have the spiritual protection, and I have a higher level of awareness than I had when I was 18. So I could probably deal with meditation today better than I did back then. I mean, I no doubt could. But as the question is formulated, would I recommend it to a person that's new on a path? And I would say it wouldn't be my first recommendation. But then again, as I said, everything is individual, and people need to follow their individual intuition. So if you have a strong sense that meditation appeals to you, don't let me talk you out of it. In fact, follow your intuition rather than following what I'm saying. So I'm sure there's much more I could say about meditation, but right now nothing else comes to mind. So I'll just stop right there, and maybe if something comes to me later, I'll talk about it again.